Hi, Jamie.
Hi, good morning or good evening to you.
Here we are again with our weekend chat, which um, I know it's been a really big week for both of us, and with that comes different emotions, different feelings, and I guess for the first time ever, I've said to you, "Do you know what? Today, this is what I'd really like to talk about." And it wasn't just me picking something random. Reading your articles this week, it's what spoke to me. So without sort of like keeping people in too much suspense, the theme of today's chat is the three C's. I was going to say the C word, but there's too many. So these are community, comprehension, and communication. I mean, there are others as well. I was thinking, oh, maybe we slip in connection, but does that kind of fits in with all three? And compassion, and cult, so all these other C's came in, but the three that I felt were really kind of, I don't know, speaking to me from a personal perspective. And I now know, having spoken to you as well, just ahead of our recording, is that community, comprehension, and communication. So,
Yeah, and there's a lot on that plate,
mm,
and I was thinking of your chat with Libby, which
mm,
kind of talks about all of those things as well.
yeah,
And I was kind of in the moment listening and thinking about that kind of relational attunement that was present as you were chatting. And essentially you've built a mini community in that conversation, and it just kind of flowed. It was, I'm always jealous, as somebody who comes so late to language, that people can be so effortless in their talk, in their communication. It just happens, it doesn't seem to be any kind of struggle to get the right words out, and that meaning is traded back and forth and back and forth, that
mm,
comprehension side of it. Um, so yeah, I've really enjoyed every episode of Give Me Five, but I really, really enjoyed the talk with Libby.
yeah. What was it that kind of struck you? What was it, the that you sort of the chord or chords?
Well, it was the whole of it, right? I felt the whole of it first, and I just
Yeah.
kind of sat with it, and you know, I just found myself kind of nodding along, going, "Well, yes, well, yes, well,
Yeah.
yes," and sometimes I might have a bit of a disagreement, or I might experience it something, along the same lines but
Mm,
differently, and and I think, in terms of like the autistic experience, a lot of times
yeah.
people are talking about autism from the outside in, and I,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
course, talk about it from the inside out. But I didn't get the sense like it was being pathologized or wasn't, talked about. It was being talked with,
Yeah,
so that's that community thing, you know.
absolutely. And I guess, part of me thinking about this is um I've had some, people contact me and just say, oh, how much they enjoying our conversations. And I'm thinking, gosh, all these people are like listening, but it is about community. And I guess we kind of started this up at the beginning with, oh, we're kind of like enjoying each other's company, almost our own little community, which is growing. And that's part of why I started up Gimme Five, really, because I felt there was a need to extend that community. And one of my next guests is um, a school student, secondary age. I think she's just taken her GCSE, so she's 16, autistic student. And so I'm really looking forward to more of the inside out within the community as well. Did I say
Mhm.
anything vaguely when you said that Libby, Libby and I were? It just seemed to flow. I kind of feel with my ADHD brain, and I time of life menopausal brain that actually the words don't flow at all. I get really quite anxious that then they're not flowing and I say the wrong word, and maybe there's some nice little malapropisms in there as well, just for good measure.
I appreciate the kind of the ADHD communication style of, squirrel and going down rabbit holes and stuff. And you know, with autism and ADHD in the same system, it's experienced a bit differently.
Mm,
But I appreciate it, and um, I find myself, enjoying those types of conversations where it's not scripted, it's not any kind of format. It just goes where it goes,
yeah,
and that was the sense that I got when I was on the show, was like, here's a general sense of what we want to do and a general sense of time frame, but let's just see where this goes. Let's go where the
yeah.
day takes us. And my brain is very much that way, and when you see the whole of it, when you feel the whole of it, and then you struggle to find the parts that make things intelligible, and that happens over so long of a time, you know,
Mm,
um, it's often perceived differently, this week, myself, in life here, in conversation about paperworks and stuff, the end of term, and conversations with parents and administrators and stuff, we have female students who are clearly autistic, and
mm,
yet the system doesn't recognize that, and so they have, specific learning disability as eligibility, or other health
mm,
impairment, based on
yeah.
or ADHD and stuff. But and I'm sharing this with parents. I received, the original diagnosis under DSM-4. I was in my 30s, right? So I did not become autistic as soon as a doctor wrote it on the note. I've been autistic my whole life.
Yeah,
My orientation towards my body and all of the craziness and stuff, it didn't happen with a diagnosis. I just, many, many decades later, I gained the words for it. And
yeah.
to a certain extent, I gained the relational safety to be able to say, in my previous life, my previous career, I cannot say I was autistic because they had a perception of what that meant, you know,
Yeah.
in the same way of my legal journey back towards UK citizenship. The original inquiry on my part was met with the Crown saying, no, we know autism is a significant burden on the National Health Service, and so we reserve our right to decline your request on that basis, right? And
Mm,
so there is that community that says, no, you're expensive, stay away. Right?
yeah,
Even
yeah,
though I have
yeah,
no history really, in terms of
yeah.
autism, and because I was diagnosed so late, they didn't put all of the behaviorists and all of this stuff into my mix. I just wanted a word. I wanted to understand, why. And then, even the journey towards Gestalt processing, that took even longer. Why does my brain work this way? Why do I get flooded? Why do I, think this way? Why do I communicate this way? And so, where I was when I was writing No Place for Autism 2022, and when I was writing holistic language instruction in 2023, in that space, I found Marge, right? But prior to that, I never heard of her, right? And because of my experience with speech and language therapies, um, and I think it's a very unique function of language that in America they're called pathologists, and in
Mm,
UK they're called therapists, right? And I don't want to be pathologized, right? But
no,
when I
I don't
received
want
the
to be theraped.
diagnosis, exactly. Well, I was, struggling with illiteracy and language and all of this stuff. And the pathologists here, they never dealt with somebody my age. They had no idea what to do with me. And so there was no program for me. I
Mm,
had, occupational therapy for things. And the occupational therapist was like, well, I'm not qualified to do speech and language, but not for nothing, you can try the theater, and that will work several, occupational things at once. And a lot of it was me being terrified around testimony. As an analyst, I would have to testify in court, and it
yeah,
terrified me. And I worked very hard on presenting the evidence in the report, such that perhaps, the proceeding would look at it and say, well, that's a very airtight case. We don't want to call this person because they'll ruin our theory of the crime. And to a certain extent, it worked. I probably in my career testified a dozen, 2 dozen times, in big cases and stuff.
Mm,
Where my colleagues had done hundreds, and they tried to do it because it was part of their resume building. I mean, I don't want anything to do with testimony, And I ended up after I retired and went into private practice, I ended up testifying more in that period than I did in my entire career for the civil service. But it was terrifying, and the original request to do things like this and the GLP conference was absolutely terrifying because I was so used to keeping myself to myself because I
mm,
didn't like the way I sounded. I didn't like the way I looked. I didn't like a lot of things about my kind of public persona. And I've been through so many different therapies and, voice coaches
mm.
and accent coaches and stuff. And even the accent coach thing was kind of traumatizing because I was on a Discovery Channel thing for, maybe 20 seconds total airtime or whatever. And you can hear me kind of leaking out of myself. But they went, and had, just like, the Australian Marvel superheroes, they all
Mm.
sound kind of Canadian, right? And there is this phenomenon in Hollywood where they want everybody to sound like a certain milieu, and so I had to work on that, and that was kind of traumatizing a bit. So I can do kind of a American enforcement accent if I practice again, and I can kind of do a Texas thing, which I think, a lot of Scottish people can do kind of Carolina and Texas because that's where Scottish migration went through and Irish migration went through. And
Okay.
so, when you see Ewan McGregor or Ewan Bremner, in movies where they're Americans, they sound like they're from the Carolinas or from Texas, right? Because that's the easiest thing for Scots to do. But yes, I think, the show with Libby, the three C's, I think I've been all over that this week.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, just then as you were talking, in my head, I was going, okay, well, I had this little order, but actually, do you know what? It seems more like we should go into communication through because of just what you've said, and that being your communication being accepted or or not feeling accepted, feeling that you needed to change your voice in some way, and how many are in our community feel that way, that they have to alter their communication to fit sort of social neurotypical norms. Um, and yeah, and that was something that you were being requested to do back however long ago it was that you were saying in terms of changing your voice, changing this, changing that. um but I'm going to be very clever now with this linking. Then through community, and I hope that after that very first meeting that we had, there seemed to be a connection, and then community started to grow, because then we met again and we did another bit for the conference, and it felt like we were sort of stepping into comfortable communication shoes, so to speak. It felt much easier. And then, it's gathered so much momentum now as a community. And here we are every kind of like weekend. But when you say that, your voice, you had these concerns, I mean, everybody, that's one of the things they all say is how much they love your voice. Sorry, this is more about a Jaime appreciation show at the moment.
No, I think it's something like I've been really kind of working on and thinking about, you know, being so public is very new to me.
Mm,
Um, Over on the other Substack, I have a series right now, The Acoustics of Quietness, and what it means to keep yourself to yourself. All right.
yeah.
And I've spent a whole life keeping myself to myself and remaining silent and stuff. And even kind of in the middle of all that, because I'm sharing all this stuff with Teresa at the same time I'm writing it, and what do you think about this and stuff, because I so value her opinion.
Mm,
Um, what we were talking about, how when we first met, and she is such an effortless speaker, and she has very strong opinions about things, and they're very well reasoned and very well defended. And when we were first becoming friends, we would spend hours upon hours upon hours, chatting. And next thing you know, like, okay, well, let's go for coffee at 6. Okay, fine. And then it's 2:30 and they're kicking us out. And like, where did the time go? Right. And so that's that kind of communication, community, whatever. And
Yeah.
just remarking that, it's 3 decades later and we're still friends and we're still chatting to the wee hours. And I'm still not getting any sleep and having to go to work in the morning. And I was I was sharing, kind of, now that I have more access to language, that a large part of my script garden she gave me, right? Listening, absorbing that attunement, how effortless she was, how generous she was with her language and her scripts and stuff. And I would just sit and I would just marvel at this remarkable woman who could just talk like it was nothing. And for me, a struggle, you know, and she was graduating from college at the time that we met, and she was so proud of herself, and she was sharing all the different things that she was doing. She was transitioning into teaching, and her kiddos loved her, and all of that kind of stuff. And all of that kind of resonated with what Libby was talking about, your 3 C's and everything kind of coming
Yeah.
together. But for me, I'm being kind of marooned here, sounding different, being different, feeling different. In the 70s, that was bullied. And so, it's, you just learn to kind of, okay, I'll shut up. I don't want to say anything.
Yeah.
At my size, I cannot really hide that well. Um, so I'll take jobs that keep me in the background, personal protection, bodyguards, ghillie, that kind of stuff, where you're not in the forefront, in kind of service. Back to testimony. I don't want to be the star of the show. I want the evidence to speak. So I'll put together a package that speaks for itself. All of these things, the through line of all of this stuff is keeping myself to myself and not wanting to be in the front of it. And so that somebody asked me, "Hey, would you like to come talk?" I'm like, "Oh crap, what?" No, but okay, fine. And it's turned out for the best. But even, I mean, there are trolls everywhere online and stuff, and it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you don't sound Scottish like this person." Well, no, I was not raised in Edinburgh or Fife or
No.
Aberdeen or something like that. And you know everybody's idea of Scotland is kind of that Edinburgh accent. And Sir Sean Connery, and I'm not Sean Connery. you know and my Scottishness is filtered through a lot of things, and it started as Argyll and not Edinburgh. And
Yeah.
excuse me, like laryngitis again. but
Mm.
But yes, it's a very kind of, in terms of community, being so very kind of distant from everything here in California, having this online space and the ability to build community online has been tremendous for me.
Mm.
Absolutely, finding other autistic people, other people that are finding themselves as Gestalt processors through something I wrote, or my writing, introducing them to Marge, and whole other communities, other worlds. I think it's just a tremendous feeling.
Yeah, and it feels very much like that there's a growing uh Gestalt language processing community, whether it be adults who are maybe through that community realizing that's how they've learned to communicate, or how they communicate. It's like, oh, there's a name for this, there is this thing, I really relate to that. Or a parent who is listening and thinking, gosh, that is my child, my small child, my teenage child, whatever, just in the same way as you are in your classroom and noticing your students, and how maybe some of this has been missed because nobody else picked it up before. And I guess that kind of leads on a bit to, sorry, I don't know whether it is a bit of a tenuous link into the third C that we've not sort of, very much attached the other two, but comprehension. And this is one of my, I guess, areas of learning, and now almost like a bit of a bugbear with, perhaps when I'm supporting children who are Gestalt language processors, is I'm not thinking about their receptive language skills. I'm thinking about their communication as a whole, as them as a whole, as their sensory needs, their play preferences. That all comes way, way, way before, can they do this? And who decides, can they do this? Who decides that at 5 years old you should be able to understand all of these words? I don't know. It just sort of seems, where did that come from? And I guess that links really well to part of your article that you wrote this week about reading comprehension, for example, um, and how children are almost taught reading comprehension, but for lots of our Gestalt language processors, actually maybe this is not the the style in which we need to be supporting them with comprehension.
Well, yes. I mean, the article, I mean, there's such a recursivity in the stuff that
Mm,
you know, I was thinking at the time about the piece I wrote about poetry class from
yeah.
last summer, about how my district was trying to present, advanced placement poetry teaching and what you should do and how you should teach it. And I'm like, just read the bloody poem, you know. And kind of a conversation that Teresa and I had, part of it this week about not comprehension as, can you name the plot and can you support your assertion of, the main idea with three details from the text, which is the typical academic thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But what meanings have you made from it in your life, right? What does it mean to you, right? And so I was very specific when I chose the book that I chose for the exercise on the three reads, um, because in my relationship, in the community that my grandmother built in her cottage,
Mm,
in her garden, it was community, right? And so she knew I loved to listen to stories. And as I got a little bit older, she would get a little bit more sophisticated in the books. And this particular one, and I'm enjoying listening to her read about it. And she would kind of think aloud as she was doing it. Well, did you notice that, Jamie? What do you think about this, Jamie? What do you think about that? And wow, wouldn't this be amazing if we could just, in terms of like the tesseract and the folding of time and that kind of stuff. Oh, well, Jamie, doesn't that sound incredible? Right. And so that first read, it's the field, right? It's establishing that relational
mm,
sense, what's going on here. Does that mean that you have to read it or can it be read to you? Right? Does it matter if we're decoding and all that stuff, or do we want to get an understanding of the story, what's happening,
yeah.
right? And so I kind of give, in that first read, the example of things to notice in the relational field, right? Because these are things that my grandmother would do naturally, you know.
Mm,
Think about, what the adults are doing in this scene. Why aren't they answering questions? Why do you think they're not answering these questions? Why do they keep referring to these things? Why,
mm,
what happens when they feel safe and then they don't feel safe? How does that make you feel? When things like that happen in your life. And so it wasn't a sprint, right? The reading of the book probably took a whole summer because, we're talking about this stuff. Meanwhile, at the town library, they're having this reading competition. Like, how many books can you read this summer? I was like, well, my grandmother read me one. Can I get a prize? Right?
yeah.
And so when I'm in my classroom and I'm reading things, I'm annotating, right? They call
Mm,
it self-regulation strategy development. I'm talking about my internal space, how I interpret things, the meanings that I make for things, And that second read, I'm talking about patterns. Why does this keep showing up? right? What's the shift in relationship here? How is that affected? Why aren't they traveling together now? I wonder if they'll be there when they get there. Maybe they have an alternative route. Maybe they want to have the children experience something, that only makes sense if they experience it by themselves.
Yeah,
So what's happening here? What keeps happening? This pattern recognition. That's a huge part of comprehension. What do I notice? What do
absolutely.
I wonder? You
Yeah.
know, and background comes into that. What is your background knowledge? What meanings have you already made from things? Right. And so, these patterns, they're visible in our minds, like the weather, right? We can name it later. We experience
Mm,
it now, right? So we can feel this, whether it's connected, disconnected, and so on, before we have those words. Right? It doesn't seem right to me. Okay, well, tell me more. No, that's it. That's all I have right now. Right? I cannot write a paper about that, and then that final read, what is this book trying to say to me? And
yeah.
then, from the standpoint of the wrinkle in time, it was saying something entirely different when it was read to me
Mm,
than when I read it for the first time. I was in a totally different place. So what is it saying to me now? And so that kind of memory as the future reminding me in the present, you know, how are all these things, repeated? How am I making connections now? You know, what patterns do I notice now at my age that I didn't notice when I was 10 or whatever? And so when I think of modern English classrooms,
hmm
they're I could pitch to my administrators. I'm going to read one
mm,
book this term. That's it. Just one book. And we are going to do 3 full reads, and we are going to really, really experience this book. Well, no, Jimmy, you must, the curriculum calls for at least 4 books.
mm.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? How, because then I think about, as you're talking, I'm then thinking about the really tiny little people that come in to see me, and or the parents telling me about their young children and their love of books. And I know that what you're saying about around pattern recognition, they need to read the whole thing, and it's usually some of the top favourites are Julia Donaldson books, so The Gruffalo, Room on the Broom, and these are children who aren't yet in school, but already the print, the rhythm, the rhyme, the pictures um, is are so motivating that they and so intrinsically connecting for them that they want to read it all the way through. And I'll be honest, sometimes I sit in my sessions and I think, I wonder what that parent's thinking, whether I should not be allowing that child to continue their path of reading literally cover to cover. And then you're in my brain and I'm thinking, forget the Chronos. Go with the Kairos, because this is what this little person is really um, seeking so much enjoyment from, gaining so much from. uh, Keep it, that I don't know what else is going on in their brain. I can only, begin to imagine, but it's something that's really important to them. And actually, it's the whole, the start to the finish. Um, and yeah, so really, even in very small children, we see similar kind of like pattern recognition that you're referring to, um, and as an adult and as an adult teacher as well.
Well, I mean, getting back to your talk with Libby and the 3 C's and stuff,
Mm,
and the article, kind of the relationship aspect of it. A few years ago, and the teacher has retired since, but I asked him if he thought his choice of kind of book for the half term was appropriate for the school. And he
mm,
had no idea what I was talking about. So he was assigning Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower for his 12th grade class. And I said, you realize that a lot of your students are completely traumatized, and that for the most part, LA is post-apocalyptic now.
mm.
And, you know, there's some very kind of ominous aspects of the plot and the characters where there is a deranged president who pledges to make America great again, right? And this is written far before our current president and all that stuff. And, part of that, what meanings are you making from this in terms of
Mm,
comprehension? What meanings are you bringing in? How are you responding? That's why I love power threat meaning framework. The power in this relationship is the teacher saying, you must read this to pass the class.
mm,
What meanings are they making from it? Well, I don't want to read about it. I live that, you know. And so why would I want to read about that?
yeah.
So that is a threat. If you didn't read it, then you don't pass the class. What meanings are you making from that? And if you're in relationship with your students, are you not listening to, what they want? And so my conversation with my colleague was, can we agree as a community of professional teachers that we can teach comprehension, we can teach decoding, we can teach all of these aspects of reading.
Mm,
And, indeed, I am certified by the state of California to teach reading and all that silly stuff. But can we agree that we don't need to traumatize children to do it? And
yeah.
that we can decenter ourselves in this community to say, you know, there are many, many books that we can bring into our classrooms that will do exactly the same thing that the children may enjoy. But just because I love Octavia Butler does not mean I'm going to subject the children to it. I mean, I love space opera and Peter F. Hamilton. That does not mean I'm going to require the students to read 5,000 pages of science fiction, you
Mm,
know, from some British author they've never heard of before, and if you didn't do it, then fine, you don't have to graduate. That's the threat. I'm not doing that as a reading teacher. Certainly not. I can do the same thing with Mr. Ben, and bring these wonderful picture books in. Um, but yes, I think, a lot of professional life, a lot of people lead with themselves and their own interests.
mm,
And they don't have that relationship with the child to say, or the group of students. Who are these students? Where are they from? What meanings have they already made? And given the thing that they're supposed to be learning, the learning targets for the year and stuff, what do I need to do? Where do I need to meet them? And
yeah.
a lot of it is economics and capital, of course. I
Yeah,
didn't have
yeah.
time to create a whole new curriculum and, master a whole new book and stuff. And I've spent 10 years making these lesson plans and they're perfect. I do new lessons every year, but that's me being me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess we probably need to start to draw to a close, but I'm very intrigued as to when your book is going to be out because these themes, alongside the articles that you're writing at the moment, are going to be form part of that. So, how much longer have people got to wait until we get to hear and read and devour?
Yes. So I made the decision to do the layout myself and to self-publish.
Yeah.
So that began this morning. I set up the environment, the publishing environment, and I laid out the prologue and the front matter. And I wanted to see how long that would take.
Hmm.
And so based upon that, there are 24 chapters. There are over 300 references. There are examples in an appendix on how to write IEP statements, send statements and stuff specifically.
Wow.
And so it's going to come somewhere in the 200, 300 range. Me being me, never sleeping, I would say 2 weeks.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Because it's summer break, it's
Yeah, yeah.
holiday, and so I have time, and I have adult children who don't expect me to be chasing around after them. So I can stay in my office and I can do the layout myself. I've gone through all of the typography and font families and setting up paragraph styles and character styles and stuff. So the hard work is, the creative stuff is done now. It's just dropping things that I've already written. The copy edit stage was transforming it from kind of casual Substack into more professional writing. And the arguments about I wanted to keep the complete gestalt as
Yeah.
it is. I don't want to reformat it. And so those arguments have been had and we're moving forward. But I thought it was important enough because I'd lost those fights with the other books that the thing that I'm yelling at my mobile as I'm driving down the road is preserved, right? That is kind of the poem in the middle of everything. That is the
Yeah.
complete gestalt as it came out. And I wanted to preserve it that way. So it will be. But now it's layout, maybe 2 weeks, and it will be self-published, and there will be links everywhere and stuff like that. But
Hey. Yeah.
um, so the yes, it is free on Substack. The chapters are already there. They're in a slightly different way than they will be in the book. The benefit of buying the book is the over 300 references. It is the examples of how to write things and stuff. There should be some
Yeah.
kind of, so those have not been included. And then another kind of style fight between publishing and copy editing and the way I'm going to do it. I'm not using inline or in-text citations, right? Because I know for myself, that ADHD side of my brain is like, oh, I wonder what that reference says. And then I'm done reading and I'm off chasing down references. So they're all there in the back and they're organized by chapter. And some of them are a bit repetitive, because some things have influenced,
Yeah.
multiple whatnots. But I wanted to be faithful to like, these are the things that are in there. I don't directly quote anybody, but these are all inspiring me and so on. So people can have that. And then kind of resisting the trend of modern academic writing of, keep your references to the last 5 years. Well, no, Vygotsky wrote in the 20s, not 2020s, 1920s. Dewey
Yeah.
wrote earlier than that, and they're very influential. And nobody has done better, I think, at some of these fundamental things. Sukhareva wrote almost 100 years ago. We have to honor these things. And, some of the stuff from the 50s, presents stuff modern and ancient, I guess now, if the 80s are ancient. They deserve to be highlighted, and Peters as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
just because somebody has written something more modern, I still want to honor that original spark,
Yeah.
and so that's why it's listed the way it's listed. And so all of that comes together. I can probably place and typeset 6 or 7 chapters a day. And
Wow.
then there is, because it's all written, I just have to drop it and make sure it's fine. And then there's the kind of final lookovers and stuff and all of the handling around publishing and stuff. So I would say conservatively 2 weeks.
Well, very exciting times, and we'll obviously announce it and we'll all announce it when it's out. So thank you so much. It's been a lovely Saturday afternoon. Much appreciated as always. And I will look forward to speaking to you soon.
Oh, I look forward to our next chat. Thanks.
Bye now.
Bye bye.